friends, welcome to your own channel Civils Tayari. We are going to begin comprehensive news analysis, and before beginning the comprehensive news analysis, let us see the daily answer writing challenge questions. Question number 1 is from paper number 3. Question number 1 says, what are the various challenges in health data systems design in India? How can we overcome those challenges? So you must be knowing that a lot of questions have been raised over Arogya Setu and other apps that are being used to collect the data about the health of people. Besides that, a lot of monitoring is going on about health. So questions are being asked about the health data systems design. So we will see what are the various challenges and how can we solve those challenges in today's world and make the data more secure in India. Next question is from paper number 1 and 3. It can be used in paper 1, it can be used in paper 3 as well. Question has been taken from The Hindu. Today's editorial. Question says, it is being argued that the incidence of poverty has increased in India due to economic slowdown caused by pandemic. So estimate the incidence of poverty and suggest the measures to alleviate it. So guys, in real examination you will not get the question to estimate the incidence of poverty. Why I have written here is so that you know the data. Whenever you are answering a question, you should have right data with you. Whatever you write, you have to validate it with the help of data. So when you will write the data figures in this answer, whenever we are writing as well, whatever we are reading, if we write that as well, it fixes into our permanent memory, or we are able to memorize it better. That is why I have written it here, estimate the incidence of poverty, so that you have a data figure ready in your answers. And we will see some measures to alleviate it. Some good measures are being given that we can use as it is in our answer writing. Whenever the question comes, definitely a question will come on poverty or anything related to economic slowdown. You will be asked to give measures to solve it. So we are going to use 3 measures from this editorial which was being discussed. So let us begin today, and today onwards we are going to start it in English. As I had asked you yesterday, a lot of you had told me in the comment section that you want to get it done in English. So that is why we are going to start the CNA in English from today onwards. Alright, let us begin. So guys, our first article question will be dealt from this article. Article is headed Heralding a New Health Data Regime in India. This article had been published in 2-3 journals which I was reading, and it is also, I think yesterday or today, it was published in ORF as well. So very good article it is, and it talks about our health data ecosystem which have not been discussed in normal articles which you must be reading in the newspapers and so on. It was a very new concept and new challenge, and as a civil servant, as a policy maker, you have to know what are the new challenges, and that is why it becomes important to discuss this article. Now the article says that India is at a very early stage of evolution when we talk about health data ecosystem. Now since we are at an early stage, it would be good for us to diagnose what are the challenges in the data systems design. So we are going to learn what are the various challenges that we have to face in designing our health data ecosystem. Now when we talk about COVID pandemic, it has appended various datafication approaches in healthcare, because up to yesterday, whatever seemed impossible has become a necessity in today's world. For example, till yesterday, if government wanted to ask our data regarding our health, I think most of us would not have agreed. When we talk about the Aadhaar based and Aadhaar systems and so on, you must have seen how many public interest litigation had been filed in the Supreme Court, where people were a bit skeptical about the data collection by the government. Now when we talk about Arogya Setu, voluntarily people are downloading it and voluntarily they are submitting their health data to the government. So what has happened in recent months is datafication approach to healthcare has become very important. We have started collecting data about the healthcare systems, and we are also, when we talk about various datafication, there are digital dashboards. You must have seen in Karnataka where Bangalore municipal board is having digital dashboards. So there are other apps like we have Quarantine Monitor, then we have Arogya Setu, then there was an app by Government of Kerala called GOK, then you have Cove Punjab app, then there are various artificial intelligence based health monitors that are placed in Delhi hospitals that will ensure that will keep on telling the people about the availability of hospital beds. Then you have artificial intelligence based techniques that will see the cough patterns, that will, as well as they will see the lung x-rays too, and it will aid in early detection of various diseases. India is still at a nascent stage in the evolution of health data ecosystem, and that is why we have to battle. Our healthcare system is very large, and when we talk about data is so scattered that it is really very important that we should have a regulatory standpoint which is able to look at data set as a whole, and we are having a good and robust health data protection architecture, because you see health data is very sensitive data, and it is being misused by so many people. That is why it becomes very important to make sure that the data about the health is safe and secure and is within India. It is not exported out of India. Now when we talk about the current statuses of health data, I mean how the health data is scattered in India today. Indian data, health data is very fragmented and scattered. It is being set up at various diagnostic centers. You'll find it in hospitals, medicinal practitioners, they have the data, pharmacies have the data, then you have TPS, that is third party administrators, have the data, then intermediaries like ASHA workers also have the data. So the issue of fragmentation is acknowledged by the Health Ministry in its Electronic Health Record Standard of Document of 2016, and this document wanted to digitize the workflow in the healthcare system, and at that time it accepted that the data in India is very scattered. Now when we are developing the IT systems without if it is not able to interoperate, that means if it is not having the ability of a hospital system to communicate the data from one system to another system, then it will lead to redundancy of data, and it will lead to static silos of data, and it will cause a lot of data repositories that will spring up here and there. So if we have to develop an enterprise architecture system in healthcare, it has been a very challenge even for the developed nation. So for India, it is going to be a double challenge. Even the National Health Service Connecting for Health, that was an effort by UK, where they wanted to develop an enterprise architecture system. It could not, it was to be abandoned after 7 years. It could not be done even in 7 years. And the key reason for the failure of this system was because it was a top-down nature of data monitoring, and it lacked any ground-up apparatus, and that is why this system failed in when we talk about in UK. Now what can be another what can be a different design? So different design can be open health data ecosystem. A digital public infrastructure industry complex in India is associated with a non-profit tech organization which is called iSpirit. Now when we talk about iSpirit, it is involved in development of digital public platform, and that will be called India Stack. So India Stack, just like UPI, which we call BHIM, right? It works on on digital public platform, right? So API is there. Similar API is being developed for, like BHIM like API or BHIM like application is being developed for health, capturing the health data, and this is being developed by iSpirit. iSpirit's app will be called UPI for Health, or some other name they may give, but it is based like a UPI system. It is based like BHIM. It is based on BHIM apparatus, right? Already we have a model of BHIM, so on that it is being based. Now what it will do, iSpirit, before making the app or before organizing the data, they are right now in a series of various open house discussions which are being conducted virtually, because of course we cannot meet people in the pandemic. That is why they are doing virtual open house discussions since last few weeks, so that they can provide a transparent account of how they are going to make this health stack or this health data set or this health application which they are designing. Now there are several design features that is common between UPI as well as other already apps that are already working. So when we talk about Arogya Setu and some other apps which are already there, so there is a lot of similarity in UPI interface and in the health stack interfaces that are being developed by iSpirit as well as which are already being developed by other stakeholders. So these are all open APIs and they have distinct consent. That means they are asking people about their consent, whether they agree to give the data or not. As well as there are data layers. That means there are data empowerment and protection architecture is inbuilt in the application itself. Then there are sandboxing testing environment. That means the apps are being tested very extensively. When we talk about this app which is being developed by iSpirit, it will be a national health stack and it is based on a strategy document that was put out by Niti Aayog some time ago. Now there are some issues that remain or that should be questioned or that should be addressed before developing a health data system. First issue that should be addressed is who is going to govern the health systems that are linked to public welfare. Second is, will the patients have access and to the data, and can they see who is using their which third party is using their data? Because you see, lot of health data is used by various developers, various researchers who are going to do trials and so on. So data is being shared by other people also, third parties also. So the question that has to be answered is, will the patients know or will they have an access about the use of their health records by the third party? Next question that has to be addressed is, what will be the algorithmic basis of the individual's score that will be integrated? Like, I mean, every person will be given a health score. So on what basis are you going to give the health score? That also has to be addressed. Then there are other fundamental questions about data ownership. Who is going to own the data? Where the data will be placed? And what will be the governing structure? If there is a data breach, who will be responsible for that breach? All these questions have to be addressed before making a data system in India or before laying the foundations of data protection regime in India. Now this role of ownership is very important. It is very important because you see, there is a very big digital literacy challenge that India faces. Digital Empowerment Foundation study tells us that there are 90% of India's population does not have digital literacy. So digital literacy is almost non-existent in 90% of India's population. In such a scenario, how are we going to address the question of ownership in these 90% of population? Now when data awareness paradigms are not socialized, that is one problem in India, and data capture becomes legitimized because of emergence of consent manager models. That means what happens is, app is first asking the consent. Once the consent is given, the data ownership becomes of the producer of app. Now that is one question, that is one model which talks about these fiduciaries. These are all fiduciaries which are managing consent on the behalf of data subject. Now on this basis, they are indulging in the trade of data, and the ownership of the data is being taken away from the actual user, and the managers are managing the ownership of data. Now this question has to be addressed very clearly. How are we going to charge these fiduciaries, or how these middle people who take the consent of the data sharing from the user and then later misuse the data? How are we going to address this question is again a very big governance problem that has to be addressed. So how can we address these problems? So what can be prescribed for a sound health governance design paradigm? So one thing that can be done is, we have to improve the interoperability of data so that data integration happens. First problem is of data scattering. So data has to be integrated. So we have to allow interoperability of data so that data can be integrated and data can be harmonized. And there should not be 20 odd ISO standards which will make the data regime very complex, very complicated, and thus it will allow loopholes which may ensure the data breach and so on. So data operability is very portability is very critical, and there are many healthcare institutions, and it is very critical because there are so many healthcare institutions which are which are using different standards of data. For example, some are using SNO-MED CT standard, some are using ICD-10 standard. So since there are different companies, there are different healthcare systems which are using different standards for data protection. That is why there is no universal data protection regime, and that can happen only when we have a data portability. So first question that we have to solve is of data portability or data interoperability. When we talk about health ministry is trying to adopt SNO-MED CT, which is one standard that is being integrated in national digital health blueprint. And but health ministry also has to ensure that there should be a seamless data portability, so that it can allow the interaction mechanism with institutions which still use ICD-10. So ICD-10 is a bit older data operation, is a bit older standard, and a better standard is SNO-MED CT. But there are still some institutions that may use this ICD-10. So what we have to do is we have to integrate SNO-MED CT and ICD-10 so that there can be portability between these two institutions which are using two different data standards. Second thing which we have to do is we have to we have to talk about the whatever application we are making. So we have to make sure that the application accommodates the patient's right organizations like Jan Swasthya Abhiyan. So there should be some civil organizations that should be accommodated while developing the app. Their perspective should be taken, their experience, they have lot of experiences in data theft and so on. So the consultation should be done with these organizations so that better protection of data can be ensured. Then we also have to involve patient right groups at this juncture, because patient data is at the heart of digital health databases. So obviously when we are talking about health database, it is the database of patients. That is why if we have patient right groups in whenever we are consulting, whenever we are making the data set, it will be good to take them on board so that they can give their valuable insights, and they can show some light on what are the needs and demands of patients. Now, if we are including the patient right groups, what will happen? Data rights will be defined bearing in mind the patient and not the hospital as the key focus, which is very important. Again, if we are making our data right is by the patient. So patient's point of view is very important. Then the health data fiduciaries, means the middle piece people, they have to have a greater responsibility in improving the readability and accessibility of consent forms by allowing for these mechanisms to be available in vernacular languages as well. And owners should be on the fiduciaries to provide notices in multiple languages so that citizens are empowered to understand what they are consenting to. Finally, we have to build a lean datafication approach. That means it should not be very far. It should not have multiple layers. It should be as lean as possible, as minimal layers as possible, so that there is a right balance between privacy, transparency and development. We have to keep in mind Justice B.N. Sri Krishna's observations. Justice B.N. Sri Krishna chaired the Data Protection Committee and he noted that each data collection exercise should provide a clear purpose description, and it should lay out a methodology for procuring the data. Personal Data Protection Bill of 2019, which is currently under consideration, it places a burden of proof for consent on data fiduciary. But recently notified Telemedicine Practices Guideline 2020, they do not provide adequate clarity on preserving the consent records. Anonymity is very essential for data because this data is classified as sensitive personal data, and anonymity safeguards the strict purpose and limitation, and it allows the data processing in a fair and transparent manner. So these principles are echoed in data access and sharing protocol of the contact sharing app Arogya Setu, which came out in May 2020. Balance between the protection of personal privacy as well as transparency, accountability is very important, and this should govern the data hierarchy which we are going to build in India. So it is very important that the data structure which we are going to build should be right based design, and it should not only protect the data, it should also ensure that the sensitive the data is anonymous, so that the rights of people are not breached. So this is what we had to write. These are different points which we had to write, very technical points as well, which we had to include in our answer. So question number 2, guys, we have to address from this article, rolling back the induced livelihood shock. The introduction is not that great in this article, so we are going to skip the introduction because they are telling what happened, and we had seen such introduction a lot. So we are going to skip this introduction. We will directly come to here. Introduction, you can pre-make your introduction about poverty. There are so many templates you will find about the poverty, so you can make an introduction from there. Now when we talk about the estimate of poverty, even before lockdown, what happened is poverty line has been very unrealistic and it is very low in India. That was done to have a conservative poverty number, because we didn't want numbers to be inflated so much. The reason being, poverty is a measure, is a performance of, it is a measure of performance of the government. So when we talk about India's poverty, even before the even before lockdown, we had a very conservative poverty number. When we talk about the data has not been updated for a long time on poverty. So we can get the data is very irregularly updated, and there is unavailability of consumption expenditure data from National Sample Survey in recent years, which has made it more ambiguous about the poverty estimation in India. So exactly, we have no official figure about the poverty's incidence in India as of today. Means at present, the figures which we have are very outdated, more so in the context of the present economic slowdown or present economic meltdown which is happening right now. The figures which we have are of periodic labor force survey of 2017-18. Now this figure had this data had replaced the employment unemployment survey of the National Sample Survey Office, and it applies the state specific poverty line which was built by Tendulkar committee in 2011. Now when we are extrapolating these two data, or when we combine these two data, we find out that 42% of our population, that is 56 crore of our people, are officially poor even before the lockdown was announced. Another 20 crore people were within a narrow band of 20% above the poverty line. So let us suppose poverty line is at 100 rupees. So 20% of population was lying between 100 to 120 rupees. Now again, these are the people who have a high probability of being pushed into poverty line, below the poverty line. If there is any problem that happens, if there is any loss of livelihood, these people can realistically fall below the poverty line. That was what we had official data before the lockdown. Now when we talk about today, the poverty problem is deepening. If we estimate, the writers have estimated the data, and they have extrapolated the data for year 2020 using some statistical models. So we exactly do not know what statistical models they have used, but again they have some figures which at least will be quite close to the realistic figures. So they say that they have estimated PLFS data, and they have extrapolated this data for year 2020, and they suggest that an additional of 40 crore people are being pushed in poverty because of lockdown. So we already have a figure around 52 crore people, plus 40 crore people additionally have been pushed into poverty. Now this 40 crore, out of this 40 crore people, 12 crore have been pushed in urban areas and 20 crore people have been pushed in the rural areas. That is what they are suggesting. Similarly, they tell that the data before the lockdown, 16% of our population was in extreme poverty, where they were spending less than 30 rupees per day. And they assume that this figure would have turned to 47% of people in extreme poverty. That means 62 crore of our people are spending less than 30 rupees per day because of lockdown. So what should we do? What should be the prescription that we can give? Now we can leave out this first paragraph, which is not that important, because we are going to write an IAS based answers or a civil servant based answers. So we have to give the prescription as it is, without criticizing or without putting any political statement. So first point which we will make is, undoubtedly we have to revamp and expand the Manrega so that it can be a fulcrum for rural recharge, or Manrega can be used as a base point for building the rural employment. The demand for the work is going to increase. It is being anticipated that the demand will increase by 25% because of reverse migration. So we are talking about the revamp of scheme. So how can we revamp it? We have to, the revamped scheme has to provide 90 million workers the guarantee of employment of at least 20 days of work per month, and this has to be done for next 6 months at least. So the revamped scheme can be a temporary scheme, and it can provide 20 days of work per month to at least 90 million people for 6 months. This will mean that we have to give a cost budget will be around 1.6 lakh crore that has to be allocated additionally to Manrega. Whatever we have done over and above 1.6 lakh crore has to be allotted more to Manrega, so that the problem of the poverty can be addressed in rural areas. When we talk about the problem of hunger, that has to be addressed by universalizing the PDS system, which is a need of the hour, but it has to be better it has to be better channeled, it has to be better targeted as well. Now the targeting could be done by identification of most vulnerable of the people and including them in the program before expanding it to the relatively better off. So first thing we have to do is, first we have to target the vulnerable people, first provide them, and then it can be universalized. So universalized should not be done in one go. Universalization, and even if that happens, first of all it should happen by identification of those people who are very vulnerable. So we have to reduce the exclusion error that we have to see in universalization of PDS. Now when we talk about urban economy, how to stabilize the urban economy. Now for urban economy, again two prescriptions are given. First thing is, we can have a direct employment program just like Manrega in urban areas also. Now these people can be used to develop social infrastructure in urban areas, like we can use them for slum development, drinking water supply, toilet constructions, parks, common areas, urban or afforestation, social forestry. All these are facelifting public work program that can make a very good difference in the condition of public utility. Plus it will also create a demand for work in district towns and small cities where there is a traditional outmigration across the from where the traditionally outmigration happens. Now obviously these are urban areas, so the wages has to be above Manrega. So whatever is the wages in Manrega, 30% above Manrega wages can be fixed for this urban program as well. And the urban program, one part of the urban program can be, people can be used to develop the urban utilities. Another part can be, these people can be given indirectly, they can be encouraged to participate as a worker, as an unskilled worker in small and medium enterprises. Now the salaries can be provided as a part of just like Manrega, the salaries can be provided by government. This can act as an indirect subsidy for the small and marginal enterprises. It will also solve their problems of finding the employment, and it will overcome their woes of the economic slowdown. And it has been said from Mahatma Gandhi till today that the small and medium enterprises are the backbone of Indian economy. So if we are able to revive these small and medium enterprises, maybe we will be able to revive our urban economy as well. So from here we can write the conclusion: if we do not alter the course of economic progress and reorient the development programs, the implication could be very severe. It could lead to increased hunger related deaths and destitution, as well as lot of social unrest and crime. So these are the realistic scenarios that can happen if we are not able to address this problem of poverty that is looming in our backgrounds. So this is in second answer, because besides these, some other editorials that have come today that we can see quickly. The first editorial, you don't have to read much, you have to only see what were the various there are some examples, what were the China policy of Nehru, which has been very flawed. It has been argued in this article. Then there the policy of Indira Gandhi, you can just see and quote them at some places. It is not very important from your examination point of view. Direct question from this editorial may not come. That is why you can just read it and and skip it, quick reading and skip it. Now when we talk about Gangster of Kanpur, in this editorial it is argued that there is and not only argued, it is very clear from this incidents where a particular gangster waited in ambush at his house to attack on a police team party which had come to arrest him. So it clearly shows that there is a nexus between police and criminals, and this has been justified by a media report which came yesterday, wherein one of the dead policemen had warned about a possible link between a policeman as well and this gangster. So the article says that there is a lot of nexus between police and criminal, which has been which is very evident in Uttar Pradesh, and it may be possible such nexuses are happening in other parts of country as well. So what we have to do, this is Vikas Dubey was the name of the gangster, and he was emblematic of nexus between politics, crime and policing in many parts of the country. Now these circumstances that went into making this incident and the response of administration at all points shows that there can be these things can be very fatal to any democratic society, and it can lead to the collapse of rule of law. Criminal gangs, if they are being shielded by politics and police forces that are bent to caste, communal and political vested interest, this is a very malevolent circuit, and it perpetuate it will keep on moving, and it will keep on perpetuating up to eternity, and it will reward the patrons, it will reward those people who are taking this forward, this nexus forward. So what we have to do as a society, as a civil society, we have to dismantle this nexus. Only then we can have a trust on, only then we can be assured that there can be a rule of law in the country. So for rule of law, there has to be a dismantling of this nexus, that is between police, politics and criminals. That is what is written in this article, and it has been argued that there should be some police reforms. It is high time now that police reforms should take place so that such dismantling can be done. Now when we talk about next question is about next article is about about WHO. So you must have read yesterday in the newspaper, again it came, wherein WHO has clearly mentioned that the WHO was alerted about this virus, COVID virus, by WHO's regional office, and the information was not provided by Chinese. So this shows very clearly, and this is somewhere it exonerates President Trump, who had repeatedly been saying that Chinese had not been transparent. The independent investigation by WHO makes it very clear that somewhere WHO has been complicit in this in hiding the intransparency of China, because on 3 occasions, including on January 30th, WHO had publicly praised China for its commitment to transparency. WHO had said that China was setting a standard of outbreak response, and also it applauded China for quick sharing of whole genome sequence of the data of the virus, and it said it was very impressive. Independent investigation from WHO has revealed a very different situation. China was not very forthcoming. This is what the latest report has stated. World knew of human to human transmission only on January 20th, and the global body, that means WHO, was often kept in dark by China. Scientific evidences strongly suggest that the outbreak began at least in early November. Apparently WHO had to keep praising China so that it shared information. So what happens here is WHO had to praise China because China otherwise would not share information with WHO. Some powerful nations like this should not be allowed to endanger life around the world by shrinking from responsibility, and China has not learned its lessons. This is not the first time when China has done like this. In 2002, in SARS outbreak also, China had not been forthcoming. China did not share any information about the outbreak, and it let the outbreak go out of hand. Current pandemic also is inflicting millions of people. It has killed more than 530,000 people. It has destroyed the livelihoods. It has shattered the world economy, and the impact could have been lessened. It would have been lessened if China had been very forthcoming and proactive in sharing the information, just like Thailand does. So here it is clear that China had violated not only the international norms. China is overplaying itself. China has not been transparent, and these problems are time and again endangering human lives across the globe. So somewhere WHO or China or somewhere has to be made responsible for this out of the hand situation of COVID-19. That is all in discussion today. I hope you would have liked my discussion in English. If you liked it, please do leave a comment, and please like and share it with your friends. Thanks a lot and have a good day.